Susan Dalgety, Scotsman.
Hi.
Andrew Liddle, the Courier.
Hello.
Both returning guests, and there's so much to talk about. So if we dive on in, I suppose first place to start is, well, yesterday's man returns after 20 years. Continuity 2.0, brought to you by the men in grey kilts. What do we think about the blast from the past, or is it back to the future with Honest John? Susan?
It's not that much of a blast from the past, because he was Nicola Sturgeon's right-hand man until she resigned, wasn't he? Well, I watched his press conference this morning, and he seemed as invigorated and as energised as John Swinney ever will be, because he's not a particularly charismatic politician. As somebody said on Twitter, a meme of Popeye, and he'd taken his spinach before he went on stage. I just think that for Scotland at this time, where there are huge amounts of pressures on the economy, on people's individual lives, on the health service, on our schools, then this just retread of a man who has been either in government or very close to government since 2007, was failed in education, his last big post. He hasn't got anything new to offer the country. He may be able to patch up the differences, the splits, the chaos that's in the SNP, but in terms of rebuilding Scotland after COVID and the cost of living crisis, I doubt it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because of course, I think you're right to emphasise John Swinney is a key man in the last 17 years of the SNP in government, that all the broken policy commitments, etc., is his. But more broadly, he's been a face. I mean, none of this does scream renewal. I mean, think of it. We've went Salmond, Swinney, Sturgeon, Salmond, Sturgeon, Yusuf, Swinney again. and the SNP, that's the SNP. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with a lot of what Susan said. I mean, I think that I suppose two things kind of strike me. The first is I think that Swinney is probably, in some ways, I think we could liken him almost to Sunak, in the sense that he's a kind of technocratic person. I know, obviously, Susan, you highlighted there, issues with education, and his ministerial record is not actually perhaps as good as the sort of safe pair of hands moniker suggests, but nevertheless, he has that kind of aura about him as someone who is a kind of technocratic, not huge on the charisma or vision, but someone who could probably manage the mechanics of government quite well. And I think that's probably fair, given we say, he's done it for a long time, so he'll know how things work. But of course, he has the same problem as well that Sunak has, that it looks like now he's going to be kind of imposed on the party after a kind of disastrous interregnum, and he's facing lots of very, very difficult headwinds that I don't think he has the either political capital or sort of natural kind of leadership skill to navigate. To be honest. So I think that would be my main point. The other thing I think that's been interesting, and we've seen this in the kind of the last few hours, of course, is he has nevertheless succeeded in navigating his first big political test, which is managing the Kate Forbes situation, which I'm sure we'll come on to discuss.
I think a couple of points that I think you made me think of listening to both of you. One, why Yusuf? Why Yusuf? Why Swinney? What's the vision? What's going to happen? what's the point? I mean, it's something we talked about this time last year, and then we're asking the same question: why? What's the vision? What's the purpose? Why now? Why not later? In regards to the parliamentary arithmetic, becomes really interesting, and how this affects the question of policy and what next. The SNP know they need to renew. They've chosen a coronation over a infighting, because I think they know that all the divisions on gender policy, all the divisions on economic policy, and what, well-being economy versus economic reality, which is how I'd put it, those tensions are all still there. And so is a parliamentary arithmetic, where the opposition parties can send blood in the water. So there's a world where Swinney, acceptable to the Scottish Greens, panders to the Greens, stitches a deal back up with them. That means more of the same. Nothing changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, he was very proud of his 10 budgets that he had put through, many of which were during a minority government this morning. But I thought it was quite telling a few days ago, young Ross Greer described John Swinney as his work dad, which made me feel faintly nauseous. Apart from that, it shows how close the working relationship. We heard Gillian Mackay, the MSP, the Green MSP, break down in tears on the radio the other day because the coalition had foundered. That I think we probably underestimated how close a working relationship had built up between some of the Greens and some of the senior SNP people. So I don't think Swinney's a brave man. That sounds quite, given at the age of 60, he's coming out of semi-retirement to take on the biggest job in the country. That takes a amount of courage, but I don't think essentially he's a brave politician. So I don't think he will stand up to the so-called progressive wing in his party, and they dominate in the group. And I think he will depend, or be looking to depend, on the Greens over the next couple of years, which means that things like gender identity, there won't be much change in the policy on that.
Well, that makes me think. Andrew, you said he passed test 1. He's handled the Kate Forbes issue, and we'll come on to that. But Susan, you just made me think of will he pass test 2 of a successful leadership? How do Cass report 34 recommendations? What does he do with that? He needs the Greens. They'll never go for it. What does he do with gender and the
a brave politician who even just read the summary of the Cass review would implement it and make sure it was implemented by the health service in full immediately, because you cannot allow what is happening or has happened to some of our young people to continue. And the clinical evidence is there now. 4 years of research, the evidence is there. This is not me writing columns in the Scotsman. This is, one of the most prominent paediatricians in the country, with her clinical expert opinion. So he should implement it immediately. If he doesn't, then the man's a coward, and we might as well have Patrick as First Minister.
It was Patrick Harvey, who's always eager to insist that people should not be denying the science of climate change, insists that we all deny the clinical science on gender transitioning with young kids. It's a really curious thing. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the point about the arithmetic as well. I think that because of course Swinney's position, I think you're right to kind of highlight the issue with the progressive wing, because I think the truth is his position in the group actually isn't that strong, right? He's been coronation, he's been leader before. There are all these, like you say, there's these questions swirling around about specific policies, and the truth is that he says, I mean, he actually had to say something along the lines of, "I'm not here as an interim leader," right? And if you have to say that, it's because people think you are, and that's a big problem for him, I think. And
Yes.
I think this sense that he's a temporary leader, I think he's going to struggle with. I mean, even putting the Greens to one side or other parties to one side, I think he's going to struggle with actually the group management, even if he has Kate Forbes in the tent. I think the mood music around his leadership already, to me, is that he's weak and is going to be in a position where personnel management,
Yes.
particularly with, as you say, these big questions bubbling around, where the actual path forward is quite obvious of what you should do, but is he going to be able to actually do it? Or I think these are things that can really affect his premiership.
And to go on to the Kate Forbes question, I think it was Kate Forbes who showed leadership, not John Swinney, because Kate Forbes, obviously, after discussions with, I presume, her supporters, her family, whatever, but also, herself as a politician with a future, decided that now was not the time to have a bruising contest, which she may have won among the membership, but it would have been chaos in the Parliament to get her elected as First Minister, and probably chaos within the group as well. So I think she's very intelligently put the leadership to one side at the moment, and she can come back to that if that's what she chooses to do. If she had ran this time and failed, that would have been her finished. She's left her options open, so it was her decision. I don't think it was John Swinney's wonderful charisma and collegiate attitude and leadership personnel skills that won that.
I think
that's. Oh, sorry, Dean.
No, you go.
I think that's fair, actually. And I think that one of the really interesting things of the last few days is this is the party of government, the largest party in the Scottish Parliament, and yet basically no one wants to be leader, right? I mean, they're kind of really struggling to find enough people, and I think it's just I'll give you a sneak preview of my column that I've written today, but it's extraordinary. I think it's such a measure of how far the SNP have fallen so quickly in the political stakes, that actually people are kind of, rather than pushing themselves forward, they're sort of trying to push colleagues forward, saying, "You do it." Because of course we all know the various calamities that are coming down the road, and no one wants to own it. And I think, Susan, you're absolutely right. Kate's been prudent in avoiding being the person that's going to have to take the rap for a terrible general election defeat, all the policy issues that are going to come down the line next year, or another disastrous budget, things Dean, that you've written about. And in some ways, I think we'll see what happens, but I think it would be a mistake for her to actually go into the government. I mean, I think she probably has to, because she needs to look like a team player. But if I were her, I'd suck with a long spoon, certainly.
Yes.
I have been thinking Kate Forbes. I think the agreement is political judgment sound for Forbes. On the one hand, I'm pretty confident that she will have had thoughts of, well, family welfare. Do I really want to put my family through you could already see the Stop Kate Forbes 2.0 campaign immediately, as soon as Humza, the moment Humza, even before Humza went. And, I'm sure we all got messages from SNP sources, and it was just like last year. So I'm sure Kate just thought, do I really need this now? I don't think I do. And that gets on to the second point, which you both mentioned, which is an element of let the men in grey kilts clean up their own mess. General election's going to be a disaster. Ipsos poll, only 32% of Scots say this SNP government deserves to be re-elected. Labour's getting increasing numbers of yes voters saying they're going to vote Scottish Labour. this is a poisoned chalice of a job right now. You can see it, like Andrew, you said, nobody wanted the job. You know, there was a deputy first minister. She didn't want it. You know, as soon as Jenny Galruth's name was touted in the press, she was like, no. So Shona's out, Jill, you know, Galruth's out. Nobody wanted it. It was quite something after 17 years. So. And I suppose the other thing is, unlike Humza Yousaf, perhaps, Kate Forbes can count the numbers, and you know she can read the mood of the parliament. She knew if she became SNP leader, she'd be in a position where she could not count on all the SNP MSPs there to support her as to become first minister, because of course Holyrood elects the first minister. It doesn't just come up with the job offer of the SNP leader, and the Greens would crawl over broken glass to stop her. Would she really want to be a first minister by the grace of Douglas Ross? Would he even be willing to put her there? I don't know. I think she could see it wasn't the right time, even with the parliamentary arithmetic, which it is what it is.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And I think she has nothing to lose, right, by holding on, as we kind of said. I mean, I think Swinney's another continuity candidate. He's a figure of the old regime. If anything, if he fails again, it just makes her arguments about the need to change direction stronger.
Did you both see that wonderful photograph? Buy the journalist a drink. Whoever the photographer was, with Kate Forbes sitting behind John Swinney.
Oh yeah,
smiling.
What you said, Dean, about the 17 years, I think that's the key to it. Every party, any party that was in government for 17 years runs out of steam. And this is the SNP coming to the end of its long period in power. And after 2026, I suggest there will be a new government, not necessarily a majority government, but there'll be some kind of new government in place in Scotland. So Kate Forbes and John Swinney will get some of the blame, well, a large part of the blame for that, perhaps undeservedly, because every government does, as every party. You can't last much longer than 20 years in power. So she will be able to regroup, and the party itself, the parliamentary, there'll be a new group of MSPs. Things will look very, very different in 2 years' time for the SNP. And I would imagine at that point, that's when John Swinney will get to enjoy his retirement properly.
I mean, it's a mighty difficult mess, because I was having, I suppose, a bit too much fun on Twitter this morning when I saw a clip of John Swinney launching the leadership in a rather budgeted leadership.
Did you see it, Andrew? I mean, it was, oh dear.
Yeah, so I was watching, and there's a clip, 3 seconds, and I've used it on Twitter a number of times now, and the fruit is very low hanging at this point. I don't have to work hard. Where he's saying SNP policies transform lives, and I decided 3-second clip, and I accompany that with easily any of the facts. 17 years, like you say, 17 years of SNP policies transforming lives. 24% of kids are living in relative poverty. 20, SNP policies transform lives. 21% of working adults are living in relative poverty after housing. It was 18% in 1997. What else did I say? Under the SNP's rent cap policy failures, Scotland has had 9% rent hike since September 22. We're sick. Only Wales is a worse situation. Then, of course, you got all the drug deaths. Drug use disorders is now the third leading cause of population health loss in Scotland. The third, which is incredible. That's how bad it is. You can just go on, and that video clip, SNP policies transform lives. Does it, John? I mean, after 17 years, the policy failures are really mounting up, and even a barely competent opposition could probably land blows at this point. And is John Swinney inspiring, energetic? Is he going to set the heather alight and get the passions running?
I Oh, sorry, Susan, go ahead.
No, on you go.
No, I was just gonna say, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it wasn't an inspiring event, his leadership launch at all, and I think it's indicative of, I mean, I suppose how little the SNP politicians have had to do internal leadership elections, that they're so bad at doing it. I mean, Labour ones, for all the faults, they do look very good. They know how to do them. They're well versed. It looked terrible. I mean, it's certainly, and I think it's for what effectively was his first speech as a new SNP leader, as we now know, given Kate's not going to run against him. I think it sent a really not very good message in terms of the optics of it before you even get to the text, as you highlighted very, very well, Dean. So I think it was not an encouraging start in that respect, certainly.
I actually think it was deliberate on his part.
Right, less flash.
It's kind of pared down, austere, not at all extravagant, completely the opposite of any of the set pieces that Nicola Sturgeon did, particularly when she was anointed as First Minister. She was practically, on a golden throne, So I think in part that was deliberate, though it may have backfired because it looked like something people on Twitter were saying the 1990s, it looked like the 1970s, to be blunt. And it just allowed everybody on social media to go, oh, well, they're absolutely broke. Where's the £600,000 brand for? So all of those things were sparked off because of the austerity of his setting. But I was interested in what he had to say about housing. I mean, the 200 million that the SNP cut out of the housing capital budget a few months ago, and that was an absolute, I mean, it was a disaster. It was unbelievably crass thing for a government to do in a country where your two major cities, Edinburgh and Glasgow, have both declared housing emergencies, where people literally cannot afford to rent a room in a shared flat in Edinburgh, let alone, buy a first home. So, but then the cat-handed way that Humza last Friday, suddenly found 80 million, put it back on the table for housing in Dundee, next door to where he lives, was, I mean, it was just amateur hour. It was awful. But Swinney raised that as an issue, and I just wonder if he's going to have an emergency budget anytime soon, even though he's got nothing to play with, because they're all bankrupt. They have no money. So rearranging the decks and the chairs on the Titanic. But I just wonder if he's... Because if you're going to you've got to prioritise over the next. You've got to make things feel better for people in the next 2 years. Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, Susan. I hadn't thought about that, but of course, as well, just politically, he needs to. It would actually be quite a good way. He needs to get out on the front foot, and that would be a good way, I suppose, to try and present himself as some kind of change, some kind of refresh. Would be an emergency budget or something along those lines. Very interesting. That's an interesting suggestion, actually.
Yeah, of course, SNP leadership launch announced in the Daily Record. That's probably Murray Foot connection, because I was not surprised that it was the Daily Record that the news broke. But on what you were saying, they need to, on policy, they need to get off of gender. They need to get off of culture. I'm sure John Swinney will probably do what Humza cat-handedly attempted to pivot. I mean, the whole point of ending the Butte House Agreement, now I've long said he was personally dependent on it. I told you so. But yes, John Swinney probably is now free to talk about more useful things without the Greens having their pots of policy cash wasted on ludicrous things. So by push the Greens being more marginal, he probably can take some money out of their pet projects that they had been playing with. Maybe that'll produce something. Other hand, I noticed the Conservatives, the UK, they will not be engaging in policies that result in more cash for Scotland if that means the SNP can take a cut of it for their policy projects. Because you can see the hand of, say, the Scotland Secretary of State for Scotland, when the Conservative UK government decided on the kind of tax cuts that they ended up doing. What was it, the national insurance or something they were talking about? Was it national insurance cut or something? That's because that's something they can do directly, bypass Holyrood. Because if it was something that was sort of income, then the SNP can take slices, or and they have devolutionary control. So you've got a UK government that's much more on the ball about what resources you give to Holyrood. Will the SNP pass on and spend monies and allocations the way they're intended, or will they just sort of take their cut for peddling?
Soon. Can we go back to you're talking about the UK government?
Yeah.
Swinney alluded to the change that's probably coming down the track in the next few months when he said this morning that he's actually 2 years younger than Keir Starmer. So setting himself up against, probably the next Prime Minister. But that change of government in the UK after all these years will have a huge impact in Scotland. It just changes the whole landscape. It changes how people feel about governments. So I'd be interested what Andrew thinks, how the impact that will have on Swinney and his government.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it'll be huge. I mean, I think in terms of I think particularly in the way people feel. I think that because I don't think the truth is an incoming Labour government. The economy is a bit of it is not going to have pots of cash to burn. I mean, I think there may be more slightly more liberal spending than Rachel Reeves, etc., are willing to suggest now, of course. But it's not going to be a sort of bonanza. But I think the kind of feeling that that people in Scotland will have will be very, very different. And the way the SNP has kind of traditionally set itself up, at least in the last kind of 10, 15 years or so, as the kind of opposition, as it were, to the Conservatives, well, that's not really going to work anymore, because if you're setting yourself up in opposition to a Keir Starmer Westminster government, you're kind of going against, I think, what the majority of people would want and think. So that will be a really difficult issue, I think, for Swinney to navigate, for sure. I think the other thing, just to go back one more as well, just at one point on the policy thing, because I think that one of the issues Swinney also has is that actually, as you said, they need to get away from the gender stuff. They need to get away from the culture stuff. They need to get back to basics, for want of a better
that worked well the last time.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember that.
Desperate, end of term governments always need to get back to basics. But I think there's a genuine point there. But also the issue that he has is that so much is going wrong with things that are currently kind of in process. I mean, sort of NHS waiting lists. I mean, the delay in the ferries. The police not investigating minor crimes anymore, this kind of thing. And so it's difficult. What we don't really need, actually, is more kind of headline flagship policy initiatives. We actually need him to kind of get the services that already exist working properly. But that's not a very kind of sexy, attractive message of So I think it's going to be difficult to see again. How does he make that something that's going to help turn around the SNP's fortunes? I think quite difficult.
Sorry, on you go, Dean.
I was just, as you were both sort of, I was thinking Swinney and Kate Forbes, they're economics, they're very centrist, as a matter of fact. I'd expect, so as they'll probably pivot more to a more pro-business, market-friendly dynamic, as that's happening, you'd have a UK Labour government which is renationalising railways. The comparison and the optics there will be really interesting in coming years, because people say, I mean, Tartan Tories, it's an old blast from the past. Rhetorically, it doesn't punch as hard as it did do in the 80s. I don't know. It might once again, if the Conservatives, the SNP under John Swinney are pivoting towards a more economically pro-business, more free market position, whilst Labour are talking about British GB energy, renationalising the rail. The optics will just be very radically different in the next couple of years.
Yes. In terms of making public services work properly, which is what the actual biggest challenge for Starmer as well as for Swinney. Though I was down in West Yorkshire last weekend campaigning for a friend who's originally from Dundee for the council election. She's standing in Eccleshill in West Yorkshire today. And speaking to people down there, I think Scotland's education and NHS services are in a worse state than they are in England.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's anecdotal, but that was the impression that I came away with. Ironically, Swinney's a bit of a technocrat. He might be better at rolling up his sleeves, and he knows how, as you said, I think it was Andrew earlier, that he knows how the system works. He's been in government since 2007. He knows how to make the civil service perform. So it will be interesting to see whether he ditches the Sturgeon habit of huge, big, glitzy announcements, which fall to pieces at the, at the second look. So yeah, that will be his approach to governing. Will be very interesting. He's got whether he can bring in change quickly enough, and whether he can persuade people to trust him. They don't need to love him, but just to kind of like him. I doubt he's not got it. He didn't have it when he was leader before, so he's not.
Because I was just thinking, I was just thinking last time he was leader, what was it? The penny for Scotland or something, and I think he has this. I mean, how can I put this? John Swinney, he knows how to pull the levers of power, get the civil service to do what he wants. He is a technocrat who's competent like that, but he's not exactly got a great record pulling levers of power to obtain desirable outcomes.
Yeah.
He was there, joined at the hip with Nicola Sturgeon when she was leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
I don't know if we should expect that he will be capable of obtaining different outcomes.
I think as well there's a question about personality. I remember when we had this discussion, maybe almost a year ago or a bit more than a year ago about Humza. It was one of the things we talked about was his personality in terms of was he suited to being First Minister. And I think there's a bit of a question about that for me with Swinney as well. I think for two reasons. I mean, I think he's obviously a more experienced guy, but he was leader before. So to my mind, to engage in a bit of amateur psychology, there's quite a lot riding on it. I think for him, he'll need and want to make a success of it. You can fail once, but if you have another go, you then want to get it right. So there's a lot of personal pressure, I think, on him in that respect. But then the other thing, I don't know if you saw, there was a clip yesterday or a couple of days ago from the chamber, I think from the Labour's no confidence debate, with Douglas Ross kind of calling him honest John, and then getting called up and Swinney's response to that, and I only saw it on Twitter, but he seemed to be quite agitated, and Douglas Ross seemed to have got under his skin a bit there. And I think if that's happening now and in those circumstances, then it makes me wonder, is that going to be something that's going to happen more in the future? And, when you're actually under the cosh and things aren't going your way, how's he going to respond, and how's the public going to react to that? So I think that's another element as well. I'm just not sure about really with Swinney, and if he's going to be right.
Yeah, what was it? Not so honest, John. I think.
Yeah, that was.
He was putting it about. He was just a bit of causing trouble and enjoying it. There's a word I suppose I'll just say. Douglas Ross was basically just engaging in shithousery. That was basically it. And 20 years. Will he have learned from past mistakes? Was he failing failures in 20 years ago, general election and Holyrood? I mean, I remember I was reading Ian McWhirter. He's already writing articles saying third time loser. So there is a lot of pressure.
Yes, I mean, Swinney said today, didn't he, that he gave the impression that, you learn a lot in 20 years. He's now a 60-year-old man, and I know personally that I have learned a lot as you head towards your 60s. You do change. You do approach problems and challenges and work differently. So he will be a different person now than he was in the early noughties. But I just think that they have run, as the SNP have ran out of steam. And we still haven't even mentioned the I word, because when he was asked about that today, and he needs to keep his membership on board, and his, and the whole point of the SNP is to leave the UK. So, independence has to be number one, and that's what that dominates their thinking, no matter what they do.
Yeah.
Which is why I think they are so bad at government, because they see everything through the prism of independence.
Yeah, it's the fundamental problem that Humza faced, that Sturgeon was very adroit at preventing, I have to admit. Swinney will also have to deal with the de-alignment of support of it for independence means you vote SNP. That's now gone. That no longer falls or tracks. Sturgeon went to great lengths, very adroitly, to keeping that binary mentality there. Humza, it completely unraveled. Swinney, he's not going to stitch that back up. So
no, I think in one way though that's why they've been there's still obviously some days to run, things could change, but it seems like they're going to avoid a leadership contest, which of course will be advantageous in that respect. I think one of the issues they had last year was they had this very tricky internal leadership contest where everyone was competing to outdo each other. How quickly they were going to deliver independence or another referendum or even just a thermometer or whatever it was. But that obviously did cause problems that Humza had to deal with, because they were appealing to the membership, and the wider public was looking at this thinking, what on earth are you banging on about? Can you not just fix the NHS type thing? And I think that's so by avoiding that, I think it maybe will be a bit easier for Swinney perhaps to not get caught up so much in those arguments, but he'll still have to answer basic questions, I think, even just understandably from journalists and whatnot, about does he support a de facto referendum, what is the path to a referendum, these kind of things, which I think, as we see in the polling, and Dean, you'll know more about this than me, but even among people that support independence, support the SNP, they don't really care about independence as an issue very much at all anymore.
It's low stakes,
So I think navigating that, again, really, really tricky. One to balancing act, and I don't know if
because the SNP, they will have to find a way of motivating their voters. Clearly, right now in the polls, clearly they're not. Obviously this is a big subsample subtab health warning. The latest UK polling, UK-wide Ipsos poll, S&P are on 2%, and that's the UK-wide. It was not that long ago. They were on 5. They were coming in with 4 or 5 points in the UK-wide polling. So it really, and on top of that, financially, the S&P went into this year with the biggest, having just had the largest net deficit on a non-parliamentary year on record ever. So they're scrambling around just to pay for this general election, and I'm not sure they have the dosh for that. All of these problems. The party machine is broken, discipline is out the window, policies, 17 years of failure. They're facing a Labour Party that knows it can just sit back and say, chaos in Westminster, chaos in Holyrood, time for a change, vote Labour. Labour will almost blend the general election into a future Holyrood election with the same message. So it's a really... And of course, he still has to get things through Parliament.
Absolutely. And you've got Alex Salmond popping up all over the place because he got a taste for the television studios again last weekend. He won't let go of that quickly, so he will be in there mixing it as much as he can, because he knows perfectly well the SNP is in chaos. They don't have any money. If they lose, as is predicted, about half, if not more, of their MPs, their short money will disappear.
Makes the situation.
Mm-hmm. And they're not getting any donations of any note, so they don't have the trade unions that they can go rely on, or business. So
it seems as well. I saw today, again just on Twitter, but the Greens, I think, for instance, announced they're running a candidate in North East Fife, which is a very marginal SNP seat. I mean, I think they've got candidates throughout the Central Belt. That's going to be a big issue for them. And actually, now I think their voters are going to be, and activists are going to be really motivated. A lot of them are going to be pissed off at what's happened, and are not going to have any reason to sort of play nice, particularly, or think, oh, maybe I'll vote SNP. It's become much more factional, that relationship, I think, which potentially could have a big impact. I suppose at both elections, but particularly at the general election, the straightforward first past the post could be really serious. And again, I mean, to Salmond, as you say, he's been touring the TV studios, both in Scotland and indeed London, where he seems to spend more of his time. But I mean, for Alba, I mean, this is their big opportunity, right? They're not going to get a better opportunity than this. So I think he's absolutely right to be trying to press home that advantage. And again, will it be enough for them to have a big breakthrough? Probably not, but it could well be enough that, particularly combined with the Greens, it cause real problems for the SNP. I think.
Very much so.
The SNP's big advantage over the recent years has been the unity under their leadership, their aegis with yes voters, yes Scotland. Meanwhile, no voters, more sceptical voters, unionist voters, very fragmented. Well, it seems like the more yes side of the equation is also now fragmenting. I remember when Alba first popped up, I think it was one of our discussions. I can't remember now. I remember saying it's the first crack in the unity of the Camp Yes Team SNP, and that leads us on to another. I suppose we have to think about it. What about Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater? Are they going to continue as leaders of their party? The Scottish Greens have quite a lot of internal problems and unhappiness in their own house.
Someone told me apparently Patrick Harvie's been leader of the Scottish Greens for 15 years, which I had not realised. I mean, I suppose I did know that, but I hadn't really thought about it. It's quite extraordinary, really. Yeah. I mean, for a modern politician to be in position that long, I mean, it seems slightly sort of authoritarian. I don't quite understand how he's managed to. Well, maybe we do understand how. But yeah, I would think, I've got to be honest, I don't know much about the internal dynamics of the Greens, but I would think after what's happened that there must be questions being asked. you would think their positions might be in jeopardy.
Because on the one hand, from what I've been hearing, on the one hand, blind fury, Glenn Close fatal attraction levels of fury with the SNP over the Bute House agreement, walk of shame in front of the morning press corps, blood on the carpets, appalling way to treat people who were just 2 seconds ago in your own government. So the Greens are united in their fury at Humza Yousaf and those that convinced him to end the Bute House agreement. I think we all know who those are. And their star will no doubt maybe move towards Holyrood in 2026, perhaps. And at the same time, the Scottish Greens, their membership are disappointed with the performance of their co-leaders, Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater in government. The climate change target unravelling, that did a huge amount of, I think that was a big blow to the authority of both the Green co-leaders. So I think a lot of Green party members seem to be saying, you guys are in your ministerial offices getting on very well together, but where are the policy accomplishments for the Green Party? Bottled deposit recycle scheme gone, disaster. Green climate targets punted. They have reason to be upset with their own leadership, is all I'd say.
But how many of the traditional Green Party members are left, the people who really do care about climate change and climate justice, rather than the so-called, I hate this misuse of the word progressive, but
I insist on saying faux progressive.
Yeah, the faux progressives that, put on a green hat and say, yeah, we're the Scottish Greens. I would also be interested, Ross Greer fascinates me in a kind of strange sort of a way, what his political ambitions are. I don't, because if I was Patrick Harvie, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could pick him, throw him. I really wouldn't.
There's Ross Greer. Yeah, he's good at getting attention, he's good at getting media talking about him, but not all bad news is good news. I mean, he has had some, it's a real sadness with the Scottish Greens for me. The party is no longer broad enough as a tent to have Andy Whiteman in it. Or Robin, the two people that made the party what they are. They've got nothing to say on land reform, the issues about the green lairds and carbon capture. They've got nothing on any of that. Instead, you've got Ross Greer.
Yes, exactly. I think that's one of the biggest scandals of recent years, not just for the Green Party, but with Scottish politics, that Andy Whiteman, somebody with his level of expertise and knowledge and political nous and, can cut across all parties and none people listen to him, that he was driven out of that party, and someone like Ross Greer is lauded as the future. That's just, it makes me really sad for politics.
But they're the party that have just perhaps chosen the SNP leader. At the moment they said it will not be Kate Forbes, and as soon as Ross Greer and his friends said that, the SNP were like, oh well, it'll have to be Swinney.
I think it was Alec Massey's line was they've extracted their pound of tofu. I can't say
I like that.
I like that.
But yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's a tragedy for Scottish politics actually that we don't have, as you say, we don't have actually an environmentalist party. I think actually with the PR system, it would be really good. It's such an important issue. It would be really, really good for our political debate, for the Parliament, for the government, if we had a party that was actually a Green Party.
Yes.
In the sense it's meant to be. Instead, we have this very weird, gender obsessed kind of.
Motley Crew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, kind of group that really, the environment is a sort of third or fourth level concern for them.
Absolutely.
I think there'll be activists and politicians in other parties who will have far more legitimacy on issues like the environment, land reform, some of the things we've been discussing. and I think that's a real problem. I don't know how you solve that problem, and I don't think, unfortunately, I think even if Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater were, to be voted out or whatever the process is, presumably they would perhaps be replaced by people of a similar.
Maggie Chapman.
Robin Harper's not going to come back, is he? Or,
No, that's
No. He's gone as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Motley Crue is correct. I mean, Ross Greer, he's out there saying Churchill's a racist. Maggie Chapman, the day of October 6th in the attack in Israel, she says, well, it's, with her appalling tweet, well, really, if you're going to occupy other people, what do you expect to happen? It's appalling. And then you've got Patrick Harvey foaming at the mouth at any woman who would dare suggest that she might be discriminated against based on her sex. It's a really weird postmodern faux progressivism.
Which John Swinney has bought into, because he was asked today, in your view, is a trans woman a woman? And he swerved that he couldn't answer. He started talking about, I'm focusing on the core priorities and challenges of the people. He didn't have a 60-year-old man who's, been in politics a long time. He has a son. He is, he's a grown-up. And he couldn't, on the record, say that a woman is an adult human female. He could not change the conversation.
Yeah.
And which suggests to me that he's not going to. Now, is gender identity ideology as important to people as the housing emergency? No, it's not. Because if you haven't got a roof over your head, then that's, the most basic right any human can expect in a decent society. But if you, as the leader of your country, cannot say without fear or favour that biological sex exists, then how can you trust him in anything? So, I have absolutely no confidence that the gender stuff is going to go away. I wish it would. I don't think it is.
Yeah. So, predictions. What's going to happen? Will John Swinney? What will happen? Policy. What does he do? Predictions. Will there be an emergency budget? If so, what are they going to say? Who's going to pass it? What happens next? What does he do to reset, whilst changing nothing?
Yeah, I think it's very hard. I mean, I like the idea. If I were advising John Swinney, I quite like Susan's idea of an emergency budget. I mean, I hadn't thought of that till today, till you mentioned it. But it's an interesting idea. I mean, we need to remember as well, Swinney obviously was apparently very upset when Kate Forbes in the leadership contest last year took on a lot of the SNP's bad record and highlighted some of its failings. So it'd be interesting to see if he in office is now willing to say, okay, here's three things we've got, three priority areas where we've gone wrong, and here's what we're going to do to fix them. I think that's personally what I think he needs to do. I think it's probably unlikely, to be honest, he's going to do that. I think if he's probably going to try and coast until summer recess, and just kind of get everything embedded, and maybe come back, I would think, in the autumn, or late after the recess, and try and push things on from there. Would be my instinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's probably right. But his programme for government in September is going to be really, really important. Humza's biggest mistake was not to set a clear yellow water or whatever between him and Nicola Sturgeon. He just picked up her policy bag and went on with it. So he was absolutely the continuity candidate. Swinney has to differentiate himself. he's painted himself this morning as, you know, this elder statesman, a man of experience, learned a lot. He's going to roll up his sleeves. He's going to work hard, blah. So he's going to have to show how he's going to do that. And that means doing things differently from Sturgeon and Yousaf, though Humza was hardly in place long enough to make a difference.
You know,
the trouble is, he was
you know,
there were some problems, I think, whether with this about his behavior, bullying.
Yes, there
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, there were noises.
Yeah, I think the other person who could, I mean, I think has quite a high reputation, or I mean, it's all relative, but is Ivan McKee, who obviously is I think is viewed as a kind of reasonably safe pair of hands, and is obviously a great Kate supporter. Don't know if there might be space for him somewhere in some kind of business-facing economy role, but yeah, it's
a problem. Yeah. So, final thoughts, anyone? What, have you got any final thoughts?
Someone messaged me today to suggest that John Swinney was Theresa May in drag. So we'll see if he is as successful as Theresa May was in resetting his party and the government. I think we're just going to have 2 years of not very much happening within government, maybe a lot happening within the party, the SNP itself, but and people can't wait until the elections in 2026.
Mm-hmm. Andrew?
Yeah, I think I'm actually more pessimistic, I think, than Susan. I mean, from John Swinney's point of view, I think, and this is just—it's obviously very early days, but just my instinct, particularly having watched the launch this morning, and it felt downbeat, and I think that there's, you know, big hurdles coming down the road for him to try and get over. You know, particularly most obviously being the general election, probably you know, November or in the autumn, and he doesn't have much time till then. I don't think he's certainly not going to be able to improve the SNP's position much, and of course this debacle that we've just witnessed will have done them, I think, some further damage as well.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, to go back to the point I made at the start, I think there is this perception around him that he's sort of an interim, he's a stand-in.
Yeah.
You know, there's this question: does he really want to do it? Has he kind of just done it out of a sense of duty, which I guess is probably the case? And all of that makes me think that if there's a really bad result in the general election, which I think there probably will be, I think Labour's going to do really well in Scotland, probably better than most people anticipate even now. That people are rightly or wrongly probably going to go after Swinney, and I think that while maybe he'll be able to carry on, his power and the goodwill that he's got now from kind of bringing the party together will evaporate, and I think that once again you're going to have a lot of agitated people. There's going to be a lot of infighting, which of course will be compounded by the fact that you're probably going to have a relatively large influx of now former SNP MPs wanting to get elected to Holyrood. And so it will be fun and games.
Stephen Flynn will be making his move. Oh, yeah,
he'll be making it just now.
Yeah.
It's a heck of a thing. Before the end of the year, he knows as new leader, there's going to be a bloodbath at Westminster. They're going to lose.
Yes.
You know, some of the polling. I mean, I agree, Andrew. I think it could be really bad for the SNP. As in, some people were saying, "Oh, it could be as bad as 20 MPs." I think there is a world where it could be a lot worse than 20 SNP.
Yeah, I know. You know, 2015 springs to mind.
Yeah,
it really does.
Especially if the Lib Dems can get that.
Right. It does.
That's definitely
more Tory MPs than perhaps people think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also think as well. I mean, even if we just assume that, as I think is quite likely, and that a lot of SNP supporters are going to be really disheartened and not bother to vote.
Yes.
You know, particularly if it's a kind of grim November. Then of course, you know, that will naturally benefit the Tories in a lot, you know, in large parts of Scotland and the northeast in the borders. You know, as long as their voters turn out, they could do very well just through that reason.
Yes,
Yep.
I think that will happen.
It's lots
Interesting times.
we live in interesting times,